It's been an honor to lead the AI task force for the last year. A little known fact about me that might surprise you is that when I was in high school, my ambition in life was to be a researcher in AI. So my father brought home an Apple II computer from work, which dates me a little bit, and gave me a book on how to teach yourself how to program. And that just opened up a lifelong learning of computer science for me. So I looked at AI and I thought, this is going to change the world. And I just didn't know it was going to be 35 years later. We thought it was going to change the world right away. And so I wanted to be part of that. So I went to Caltech, got a degree in computer engineering. And then I was working on my doctorate at UCLA doing some of the early research on machine vision and natural language processing when my side hustle at the time, which was writing video game software, which I only did to put myself through graduate school, took off and I had a hit game, and that kind of deflected me out of a career in academia into a career in business. So it seems very strange and symmetrical to me that now, 30 years later, my life has come full circle and I'm hoping to lead the effort on AI regulation in the United States. But it was an honor for me to be the chair of a very talented group of people last year, the AI Task Force. We had 24 members. It was very important to me that it be broadly bipartisan. So we had, rather than the usual practice of having more members from the majority party, I asked for an equal number of Democrats and Republicans, so we had 12 of each. And we had them from all different walks of life, all different policy committees, all different political ideologies. We had 25 hearings last year, so it was a very active group. And our stated goal was to, by the end of the year, release a report that detailed a proposed federal regulatory framework and a path forward for AI. And we did that towards the end of December. We released our report, and I'm very proud of it. It was 270 pages, probably the most detailed policy document on AI that's been produced by any legislative body in the world up until now. And we organized the report into key findings and recommendations. So we had over 60 key findings and over 80 recommendations. And we wrote it in such a way that it can serve as a checklist for future Congresses. And our hope is that it will serve as a checklist, starting with the 119th, to go through and implement some of the recommendations that we made in the report. So I'll give you a little preview. First of all, you don't have to read all 270 pages. If you haven't seen it, though, please just leaf through the executive summary. It's just a couple of pages long, and we wrote it to be a good guidance to the direction that we think the United States should take on AI regulation. A couple of key things that I wanted to highlight that we are recommending in the report. We recommend a sectoral approach to regulation, which is very different than is being done in other places in the world, especially the European Union. The EU passed their AI Act last year. It's a nearly 3,000-page bill that proposes a near universal licensing requirement for anything except the lowest risk usages of AI, and spins up a brand new bureaucracy to issue those licenses and create standards. We think that that's the wrong approach. We think that having a whole parallel separate licensing regime is not the way that America does regulation. And what we are recommending is to instead empower our existing sectoral regulators to regulate AI in their sectoral spaces. And this is very important. We're fighting against kind of a non-informed narrative in this country that AI is unregulated in the United States. And that is very untrue. Our sectoral regulators are already having to regulate AI within their spaces. I mean, a good example is the FDA, which has already processed over 1,000 applications for the use of AI in medical devices. Over 1,000. And it's hard to imagine a usage case that's potentially more risky than in a medical device, something that's going to be implanted in a patient's body or inform a diagnostic decision that's made to influence people's health care. And yet the FDA is already navigating the space, and quite successfully, by the way, if you ask the stakeholders, as we did, kind of across the stakeholder spectrum. So that's true of lots of other sectoral entities in the U.S. government. I mean, the FAA is already having to navigate the use of AI in avionics. The NHTSA is already having to navigate the use of AI in automated driving software for cars. And the list goes on and on and on. And so we think what makes the most sense is to empower our sectoral regulators, because the risks of AI are highly contextual. It matters very much what you do with AI. And something that is unacceptably risky in one usage context like a medical device might be completely benign in another usage context like a video game. So we think it matters what you're going to do with it, and our sectoral regulators understand that. I mean, it's a lot easier to teach the FDA what it might not already know about AI than it would to teach a brand new agency everything the FDA has learned in 50 years of ensuring patient safety. So that's the approach that we are recommending. And then one last point, and then I want to open up for some Q&A. Another thing that we want to make clear is that incrementalism is probably the best approach to AI regulation in the United States. We think that there are some things that are the low-hanging fruit that we have enough knowledge now to be able to act on, or things that have more urgency. But there are other topics that we think we have a little bit more runway on, and we think it's appropriate to be a little bit more thoughtful and deliberate in regulating in those topics. That's in stark contrast to what's being done in other places in the world where they try and regulate it all in one piece. And every time AI changes, they're having to kind of back up and redo what they did, and that's happened twice now to the EU. They had to completely rewrite their AI Act when large language models came into existence, and then a year and a half ago when generative AI was created, they had to rewrite them. And so I think agentic AI is probably next, and I think they're probably going to have to go back to the drawing board and think about the implications of that. And that's going to continue to happen because AI is such a fast-moving technology. So we think incrementalism would be a good approach for us. So we've designed that those recommendations as things that Congress can implement over the next several years. And I'm really excited to be able to move from the planning phase into the execution phase and try to get some of these things done. So,
as this administration is really, they have kind of an open comment period and are working on trying to tackle this AI piece, is Congress or the House looking to recreate the task force or some to kind of work with the administration? As much as we like EOs, we like stability in corporate America, so being able to really legislate would be helpful. So are you all looking to create a task force to work with the administration or to kind of push into this implementation phase? Sort of what's the next iteration to actually implement some of the recommendations?
right. Well, I think it's clearly going to take a combination of working with the executive branch and working within the legislative branch to get done the things that need to get done. So we have already had a lot of engagement with the administration. It's very encouraging that President Trump has appointed an AI czar and David Sachs. I think that tells you that they are taking this topic very seriously. Michael Kratsios was a great choice for the head of OSTP, really smart guy. I've spoken with both of them on this topic, and what I'm trying to emphasize is we need to work together. We need to push in the same direction. We need to sit down, have a combined vision of where we're going, and then they can get there on the executive side, and we can get there on the legislative side. Within Congress, though, I feel like we need some kind of nucleus, because if we leave it up to the policy committees, some of the policy committees will act with alacrity and some of them won't, because there's other legislative items that are sucking up all the oxygen in the room. And one thing that surprised me that we learned within the task force is just how broadly cross-jurisdictional the topic of AI regulation is. I kind of expected that we would get half of it within science, space, and technology and maybe 40% more energy and commerce. But in reality, it's spread out to nearly every policy committee touches on what we found in the report and some of the recommendations we made. So it's maybe a third SST, but in addition to E&C, there's an awful lot in judiciary because of the intellectual property questions and the copyright issues. There's an awful lot in armed services because of national security stuff. There's stuff in intel, there's stuff in House oversight because of the government efficiencies that we can get with AI. So just about every policy committee is going to have to act together to help us accomplish this. And I think we need a nucleus to kind of jumpstart that. So I would love to see the task force be reconstituted as a select committee. Unfortunately, we've got the same age-old House debate about jurisdiction. So we've got the existing policy committees that feel like that would be giving up some of their jurisdiction, and we're trying to convince everyone, no, look, I don't care. Here are our bills after we've launched them. We're not trying to steal jurisdiction from anyone, but I think we need to have a central clearinghouse to get some of this stuff started. So I'm going to keep pushing for that.
I agree with everything that Jay said. I thought the task force was extremely bipartisan. Speaker Johnson, Leader Jeffries, when they first formulated the task force, really did take a thoughtful approach to what that looked like. I couldn't really tell who the chair or co-chair was. So Ted Lieu, who's also a computer scientist, and Jay did a great job in a bipartisan way. And I think the work product was very thoughtful. We didn't have a ton of time. And to me, that's a starting point, not an ending point. Because really what we did is more questions we asked, the more questions we had. So again, I think it was our hope in a unanimous way, Democrats and Republicans, that the speaker and the leader would turn this into a select subcommittee. I think we're still on both sides of the aisle trying to push for that. And the reason for that is most of the work we did, again, were not the traditional hearings. They were more briefings where we bring in outside experts and it was just asking questions in more of a free-form way to, again, lay out an outline of how we should think about this as a legislative body. I think the next part of the work would be in a select subcommittee type format where we could have those open hearings, where the public could actually see what we were doing, where you did have witnesses. And again, whether it would be a legislative writing committee or we would be making recommendations that committees of jurisdiction would be out there. So again, it's still my hope. I don't know if that's going to happen, but as Jay said, we'll continue to push both the speaker and the leader on the importance of continuing this work. So when Hakeem asked me to be on the task force, I really don't have a ton of time right now, being on the Foreign Affairs, senior member of Foreign Affairs, and then being on the Intelligence Committee. But I did, my background as a physician, knowing that AI is one of the areas that's transforming medicine fairly quickly, said, okay, if I could narrowly focus in on the healthcare space, I'll say yes, because again, I look at AI from the perspective of how does it make our lives better? Like, what are the things, trying to deny that AI has been happening for a long time anyways, but trying to deny that it's going to impact every aspect of our lives makes no sense. So let's not put our heads in the sand. Let's actually lean into this. Let's think about what this looks like. Let's think about what those guardrails ought to be that protect us, but don't stifle innovation. How do we get that right? And again, that's the fun part, but not the easy part of legislating. And I, again, totally agree with Jay that we can't have a 50-state solution here, which is why you heard Jay talk about the pushback against our state senator in California. That was led by Democrats, actually, pushing back. And Zoe Lofgren, who's our ranking member on science and technology, organizing a number of the Democrats that do science and AI to push back and lobby the governor to veto that bill. I think it was the right thing to do. Senator Wiener is going to continue working on this, but we have reached out and said, look, let's work on this collaboratively. And I'm not confident that we're going to come up with those guardrails, and I think Jay's more optimistic than I am about the work that'll happen in the next 2 years. I think the politics will get a little bit difficult. The committees of jurisdiction could get challenging. That said, it's still the right thing for us to have a regulatory framework at the federal level as opposed to 50 different states. I think the states won't move first. And if that's the case, then how do we work with those states to have a framework that when the opportunity rises, we can take and say, okay, here's what's working in Colorado, here's what's working in California. Let's take that and let's create federal legislation on that behalf. So that's how I'm looking at this from my perspective. And again, healthcare's my area. I think it's super exciting, right? When I was there are a lot of doctors in town this week. The AMA has their big fly-in, and was with my California doctors last night. And, when you think about the myriad of issues that are impacting the delivery of healthcare here, workforce shortages, folks are retiring, the administrative burden, 40% of a doctor's time is spent on non-clinical related activities. AI has the ability and is already reducing some of that, which then frees you up to do what you want to do. I'm going to turn 60 this year, so if I was a radiologist, my eyes are not as good as that computer in terms of being able to see and learn different things. That doesn't take away from my skill as a physician. What it does is it makes me a better clinician. So can it give me better information? None of us wants to talk to a computer. We want to talk to a doctor. But can that computer, can that technology, can those algorithms make me a better clinician, make me a more accurate clinician, make me more efficient? And that's just the healthcare space. That all is going to happen. And how do we do that in a real smart way? Jay talked about the devices that are coming up, the algorithms, and one of the questions we're grappling with is, I do think the FDA is getting a lot of this right, and I would work within the existing agencies. We'll see what's left of the agencies, in the near future, and what that looks like. But in that, one question that we've grappled with, and there's a lot of industry here, is, great, you approve of the safety and efficacy of this algorithm today, but with generative AI, is that going to be the same algorithm a year from now? As it's learning, as it's getting better, it's different. And you can't go back and evaluate safety and efficacy. The FDA just doesn't have the ability to do that, or the person power to do that. So as these algorithms, as these technologies evolve and get better and change, what you might have approved of today could be totally different a year from now. What does that look like? Do you allow the companies to self-regulate and self-evaluate? Again, the FDA doesn't have the person power. So those are the types of questions that we should be working with industry, thinking about, okay, what does this look like, and as these machines get better, how does that impact things? So still a lot out there. If you, the big health systems have the ability to create their own algorithms, test their algorithms on their own patient populations. And if you look at some of this, it actually is reducing readmission times, reducing hospital-acquired infections, saving lives, et cetera. But if they've tested it on a model of patients in San Francisco, is that small rural hospital in Alabama, is that algorithm going to work the same way? What does that look like? How do we have a clearinghouse of these algorithms? So right now, most of the healthcare space is pretty benevolent. They're sharing what they're learning and so forth. But at some juncture, there's going to be a competitive advantage for my health system if I come up with an algorithm that really does reduce hospital readmissions or hospital length of stay 50%. Am I going to want to share that with my competitors? Now, I'd say yes, because that's good for the American patients, but I also live in the real world and understand that that world's coming fairly quickly. So what does that look like? So those are some of again, I understand the healthcare space, starting to dabble in how we can use AI locally. So I've been talking to the cities and counties in my region, the greater Sacramento region, and thinking about it from a transportation perspective. Because I really do think, if we use AI in transportation, reduces congestion, commute times, et cetera, like all of that stuff's starting to come. Right now, none of the cities they're collecting the data, because now a lot of the newer cities have cameras and so forth. They're moving away from the motion sensors that sit under there, under the streets. They haven't decided how they're going to use that data, but that day's coming. So for the newer municipalities, again, controlling streetlights, controlling traffic patterns, controlling what I'm pushing my cities and counties to do don't do this in a silo, because traffic doesn't stop at the border of your city. So we've got to think about this together, have a larger conversation. So we're looking at systems, if we're buying something off the shelf, if we're developing our own systems that actually interact across city and county lines, and what does that look like? So to me, that actually is pretty interesting, exciting, and I can imagine how that all evolves. Now, the problem there is with the older cities. So when I go to the city of Sacramento, talk about it, they're like, yeah, but we've got a problem, because that little junction box that sits next to that, like when you open it up, there's actually just a little timer in there, and somebody has to manually, and it's not connected to anything. And that's a problem. And the city of Sacramento, as an old legacy city, doesn't have the funding it'll cost millions of dollars to connect that. So again, the more questions I ask the the more questions we have. But those are things that we have to figure out. Because again, I look at AI, I look at all of this as, yeah, we're on the first phase of what is going to be transformative of the next decades that can make our lives a lot better. So.
How do, not just the US, but with allies, how do we collectively kind of keep that cutting edge against adversaries, including China and others? There's a race going on at the moment, and regulation, privacy concerns and others kind of play into that. So how do you sort of see that balancing out and us keeping that cutting edge?
Yeah, so obviously DeepSeek was, a lot of folks looked at that. And we're spending time trying to understand. I still think American companies, European companies still have a huge advantage and are still the best position to do this. This is where good government policy, I think, is important. Continuing to support our academic institutions with this work, doing tech transfer a little bit better, and what does that look like? But then from a policy perspective, and this is something I don't totally know the answer to, but I know it's being discussed on the Hill, as we think about things like export control, et cetera, limiting technologies, does that push our adversaries to say, okay, we've got to innovate and so forth? And I don't know that DeepSeek's the best example of it, but obviously they had a bunch of NVIDIA chips. So it's not that, okay, well, they invented everything on their own. They had a lot of this stuff already, and they used it. But it also forced them to think about the algorithms and things like that. And I'm not a computer scientist, but I always seek out people who are smarter than me, and they're like, yeah, they did come up with some interesting algorithms and things that were innovative. And they published a lot of their research. I don't think we should be scared and panic about that, but I think we should understand that, right? So we probably will do export controls under this administration. What does that look like? How are we smart about that? How do we certainly protect, working with our allies and friends, vital intellectual property, technology, et cetera, for advantage. But China's getting better at this.